name is Jeff Titter. I was raised in Pacific. I've been interested in history for a long time of Pacific. I was an alderman for 2 years, mayor for 4 years. I've served on the park board, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Historical Society. So the first time I was ever appointed to a committee, it was in 1993. So I was 18, 19 years old when I first got appointed to the park board. Yeah. So I really enjoyed being a mayor. It was kind of a dream of mine because my mom had worked for the city for 30 years, and whenever she'd have to work late or go down to City Hall at night, I would always go down with her. And I would sit there and get, just see what she's doing, and I started looking through files, and the history files of Pacific. And I started reading, becoming more interested. So, and with my mom being involved in government in the city, it kind of got me turned on to it. And my mom used to do the minutes for the Board of Aldermen meeting, and she would come home and play those recordings so she could take the minutes, and I'd sit there and listen, all night long with them, and I guess that's how I got the bug to be in government. So after I was alderman, I only served 1 term. Took a year off, and then I decided to run for mayor and won. I was the second youngest mayor. I was 27 years old. The youngest mayor was Henry Williams. He was a few days younger than me, so he was 27 also whenever he won. But that was in the 1890s when he was mayor. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing the progress of the town. My theme was today, tomorrow, together we can build a better community, because I wanted to build a community. I wanted to get people involved. I wanted activities in town, and see the town grow, and be responsible to the citizens. I enjoyed when I first became mayor, that was when they first started the car cruise in the downtown area. Before, they used to hold the car cruise or the car show out in the park, but they decided they wanted to have it downtown, so that's when we closed off the streets. So the first one was in 2002 or 2003. So I really enjoyed those events because it drew a lot of people into town. And right before I became mayor, the Pacific Partnership started the downtown revitalization, and that group and started getting together. So it was a lot of activity during the 4 years. We had a lot of residential growth during those 4 years. We had 2 big subdivisions come in. We had Westlake and Eagles View. They came into town. They started to develop during my term. We had a lot of infrastructure projects. During my time, we rebuilt South and North First Street. Totally ripped them up, replaced all the asphalt and sidewalks and stuff. So how we did that was with grant money. And they applied for the city, the previous administrations applied for grants, and they just happened to start to come and due when I was in my term. So I had to get them done or we would lose the money. Mm-hmm. So we had North First Street, South First Street, and over East Summit Road. We totally rebuilt.
And what'd you do after you finished your term as mayor?
Decided not to run for re-election. I went back to school to start my master's degree. Did not finish it because I met this girl and decided to marry her, and so but yeah, I wanted to go back to school. I thought, I was 31 when I left office. Thought, okay, go back to school, get my master's, and maybe come back and do something for the city or run for mayor again. But met her, married her, and moved to Union. So, but Pacific is still my hometown. I still come down here, still involved often. But after mayor, I still stayed in the city for a couple years and was appointed to the museum committee and continue to serve on that.
So now that we're housed here at the Red Cedar Inn, the Meramec Valley Historical Society Museum, tell me the history or like the progress. How did we get to this point?
Okay. So, like I said, as a kid, I was always interested in the history of Pacific. Sue Reed, she did an amazing job collecting history in her group, and she helped form the Genealogical Society, and their collections were housed at the library, and they mainly had paper documents, pictures, and stuff like that. So I'd always go in there and research and stuff and look around, and so I started thinking that there's really no artifacts. There's no collection of anything. I noticed I've been to a couple of estate sales where things that were Pacific were being bought and leaving town. So as an alderman in '99, I was an alderman and Jill Pigg was mayor, and I asked her if we could form a museum committee, to start collecting some of these items. And she did, and we met. She appointed a few people, a few residents in the area, and we met up at City Hall and started to get a game plan of collecting items. The first item that was donated was a globe, a glass globe that went over a light fixture in the old bank. Hilda Banderman and her husband Glenn donated that, or loaned it to us for display, but we didn't have a display case yet. So we had to search for a display case, and where Dennis Oliver's office is now used to be a gas station before, and then became a sandwich shop, and then it was not used, but they had display cases in there, and the lady that owned it, Betty Amilati, she donated a couple of display cases to us. So a gentleman by the name of Freddie Brown, he refinished them, and so our first display was in the lobby of City Hall, and so that was that globe was the first thing that we had donated, and that was the first thing that was on display. So that's where the museum started. We started collecting the items, and the closet that we had was getting full, so we had to buy. So then our storage was a metal cabinet, two-door cabinet, that was in the council room of City Hall, in the back of the council room of City Hall. That was our storage. And then we stayed there, in the lobby of City Hall until in 2005. I had this dream of building a new City Hall, because the City Hall at the time was small and needed to be expanded. But I wanted to move City Hall back downtown. So the alderman and I, looked at some property downtown, and we purchased the lot and house at the corner of 2nd and Union, what we call the Wolfe House at the time, because it was owned by the Wolfe family. So we purchased that, and my hopes was eventually we would get money, and build a City Hall. Well, I left office before we did that, but knew it was going to be tough to find money, and the mayor that followed me, I knew he would be tough to find the money, so I asked if we could use that temporarily as a museum. So that was our actual first museum, was in the Wolfe House. We had the living room, and a couple of bedrooms had different displays in it. The living room had just several display cases, and there was shelving that looked like an old store and stuff like that. Then one room had police material and other stuff around the town, and the other room had war memorabilia and Farina Farms. So that was our first building, was there at 2nd and Union. Now it's the Knights of Columbus. The city sold it to the Knights of Columbus because the city decided that they didn't want to build a new City Hall. The administration decided just to add on to the current City Hall. So they didn't need that property anymore, but the administration still wanted a museum, but they wanted to move us into a different building. And because originally St. Bridget's wanted that lot, but that fell through, so the Knights of Columbus purchased it. So originally it was talked of buying Red Cedar back in that time, 2009, 2010 timeframe. But the city at the time decided to pass on the Red Cedar, and they bought what we call the Wolfe House, which is an old house that sits on Osage Street between Columbus and First. Purchased that, but it needed some work. We kind of looked at it and it ended up being really too small, so we never moved in. And then one winter the pipes burst and flooded the whole building. So the city sold that, and we were in storage for years, and we actually moved several times. The collection, first we had part of it in the community school and part of it in a storage room, a storage shed down in the south part of town. And in 2015, the flood happened. So I knew that we had stuff in that storage shed, so we got it as much as we could out. The only thing we did leave was a few display cases, but we got most of it out and put it at the city shed there next to the Cedars. So some of this collection was there, some of it was at the community school. Then they moved some of it to, when they bought the Wolfe House, they moved some of it to the garage of the Wolfe House. So the collection was all over town. So whenever they knew they weren't going to move into the Wolfe House, they didn't have a place for it. The community school was being sold, so the school district let us use a classroom at Coleman Elementary. So everything went to Coleman Elementary. So that stayed in storage at Coleman until the Red Cedar. So the city bought the Red Cedar and the Wintech building, and then the collection started to move here. And we waited for several years after the city bought it for the Red Cedar to come to be, and it was well worth the wait. It's well worth it, and it's very, it's a state-of-the-art museum, I feel. So I was always interested in the early days when the town was founded and when it was called the town of Franklin. Reading those documents and the list of the minutes of the meeting at the time, and how it was debated whether to name the name Pacific or keep it as Franklin. The reason why they decided to change it was because there was a town in the middle of Missouri called New Franklin, and the mail kept getting mixed up. So that was one of the reasons why they changed the name, was because the mail was getting mixed up. So they decided to name it Pacific in honor of the railroad. So that was really that I was really interested in, was the early days. And I guess what kind of triggered me being interested in the mayors and the city officials was somebody had compiled a list of all the mayors of the city. So I was like, well, I'm going to work off that, and I started to find out who before the board came in, before the city became a fourth-class city and had a board of aldermen, they had a board of trustees. So I started researching who all the trustees were and who the chairman of the trustee board was. And then I went on and find all the aldermen from 1882 on, and the city collectors from 1860 on, and the chiefs of police or city marshals from 1860 on. So I did a lot of that research and going through it with the old minutes and seeing what the people in town wanted the city to be and how they governed, and that was always interesting to me. Growing up, I always loved Christmas time in Pacific, with the tree on the bluff, the nativity in the cave, and the city used to on the electric poles, they would put decorations, and the decorations were metal wire. They had a tree, a bell, and a candle that had like garland wrapped around it, and they put them up and down Osage Street. And that just was a neat time. And one thing I remember, and it only was up a couple of times, I think, was in between the railroad tracks on First Street. There's a little planter area, whatever, with a bench. Well, somebody had cut out Santa on a train, and with some train cars out of plywood, and they would put it up there each year. And I only saw that a few years. I can remember it as a kid, but I don't know who did that or whatever happened to that. But Christmas time was always the neat time.
Is there anything that you would like, having not only been a part of, but witnessed all this progress, these developments in Pacific? Are there any things you would still like Pacific to do moving forward? Like any goals that maybe you've thought of back when your time as mayor, or that we haven't reached just yet?
My thing was downtown. Was bringing people back to downtown. I wish there was something that I know we do they do the car cruise and stuff downtown, but and that's why I wanted City Hall downtown, was to draw the people back down there. And I think they have done a lot of good with the McHugh Daily building and Little Ireland and the resale shops, but I think it just needs a little bit more. I think that's one thing that I really wish the city or organizations would really focus on is the downtown area. That's what I liked and enjoyed, and that was and like I said, Pacific's still my hometown. It will always be my hometown, and I just love the history of it because it has a lot of history.
It has a lot of history, which you don't know until you dig into.
You're right, yeah. And it's sad because you look at the old pictures of town and you realize how many old buildings we have lost. There were so many neat old homes that were in town, or buildings that were in town that have been lost, that have been torn down. And, I guess that's what I kind of would love to have been, around whenever they were first building the town. I think that's just how they came together and how it formed. It would be a good time. It would be a neat time to go back to and see. Pacific, when it came to the railroad, was a big player in the railroad. Because it was where two railroads met and split away. Went south or west, and the gentleman that was head of the Bridge and Building Department, Colonel Peck, at the time, he was in Washington. Actually, he was based in Washington, and he moved his operation to Pacific because of the location of the two railroads. And I've seen a few pictures of the old railroad, the buildings and stuff like that, but not really many good ones. And that's one thing that I wish we could find, is the pictures of the old railroad buildings and things like that. But yeah, a lot of things have been lost, and it's disappointing. I guess as a kid growing up, it was a small town, and I can remember always riding my bike, because I grew up on the north end of town, and I can always remember riding my bike all over town, and that was the neat thing. I did get in trouble one time I was riding my bike on the sidewalk, and at the time the police in City Hall was down on South First Street, and I was riding on the sidewalk, and all of a sudden this officer came walking out of the front door of the police, and I slammed on my brakes, and he caught me. He goes, "Are you supposed to be riding on the sidewalk?" I'm like, "No." So, that was, and I worked. This is how much I was involved in Pacific. During the summers when I was in high school, I worked for the Public Works Department for Pacific. I did everything from cutting the grass at the cemeteries to in the park, to help pave streets, replace water lines, and pull cattails from the lagoon. I had to put on boots and walk in the lagoon along the edge and pull cattails from there. And then we took a boat out in the lagoon and replaced the aerators. So I've done a lot with Pacific. Like I said, it's my hometown. I love Pacific, and it will always be. And I'll have to say that, you know, the one people that really kept the group going was Hilda and Jeannie Vanderman. They really kept it going for so many years that, you know, in collecting the items and putting things together, they were instrumental in a lot of the stuff we have. So it was a group effort. You know, it wasn't just me. It was everybody that worked to make this happen. So when we did lose a lot of the items that we did have, because when the city sold the Wolfe House and we closed, we didn't have any place else to go, and we were putting it in storage. We offered, if people wanted to come get their items that they donated, you know, if they didn't feel safe for them going in storage, we would return them. And so a lot of the items, not a lot, quite a few of the bigger items, good items, went back to the original owners. Hopefully, you know, once they see this, they'll say, hey, you know, we'll return it, you know, and donate it back again. But we had, like I said, they had that globe, and then we had, there was a gentleman by the name of Art Mueller, that lived in town, and he was a bomber in World War II, and he had, his wife at the time loaned us his bomber jacket, and we had that on display, you know, but the family took it back whenever we closed, so hopefully one day we can get that back. Yeah, that was really neat. So. And going back to the forming of the history committee, you know, like I said, there was the Meramec Valley Genealogical and Historical Society. That was a non-profit organization, so to speak, that was, you know, had their collections library. You know, my goal was always to merge those two groups together. Those members of that group were getting older, and the library needed more space. So whenever the city was adding on to City Hall, the leaders of that group went to the administration at the time and said, hey, you know, can we also be a member, a committee of the city and move our collection here? And they did. You know, the city opened the doors and opened an office for them to have to store their collection and things, and it took a while, but finally we did merge into one group. So, and that was always my goal for that to happen, because we were doing the same thing. They were mainly just collecting the pictures and stuff like that. I was collecting, the museum committee was collecting the artifacts, but you know, we were all doing the same thing, just preserving the history of the town, and that's what we wanted to do. Yeah, it turned out really well. It did. One thing is that, you know, that I'm interested in, I don't know why I'm interested in this, but it was all the disasters that happened in the Pacific. You know, the train derailments, the floods. You know, there was the first flood that was ever really recorded was the 1895 flood. Back in the 1840s, there was a covered bridge built south of town over the Meramec. Half the bridge was owned by Jefferson County, half the bridge was owned by Franklin County. So when that flood came through, it destroyed the Franklin County half, but the Jefferson County half was a little bit damaged. But so Franklin County said, well, we're putting up a steel bridge. Jefferson County says, no, we're just going to fix the covered bridge. So for many years, it was half a steel bridge, half a covered bridge. And if you look in that photo, I've seen several photos. One that is looking from the river, you know, and if you look, there's a lady standing there in the picture. Also, there's a picture I have of, and I think it probably is in this collection too, of a bicycle sitting on the bridge. And then there's another picture where I've seen where it's taken from another view downriver, where you can see a wagon crossing it. So, you know, that was the first flood that was really recorded. Then the 1915 flood was the first flood that really got into town and really affected people. And then you had the 82 flood, the 08 flood, the 15 and 17 floods. So that was yeah, like I said, and then there was a major fire in Pacific in the 1891 where it burned every building on St. Louis Street from First Street to Columbus Street, and it destroyed the first newspaper that was ever in Pacific had destroyed all their material and stuff like that. So that's why there's really not very many records or newspapers from before that time. There's a few, but not many.
How about the train derailments?
The one that I can remember a few as a kid. The big one when I was was an adult was when 3 trains back in 2001, 3 trains collided just down by the silica plant. So that was all those coal cars and all spilled onto Osage Street. I remember seeing pictures from a train derailment in the 1940s, where you can see where one of the train cars is hanging over a house. So I mean, there has been several train derailments in town and stuff like that, but none of them has ever hit a building, coming through town. So, which is a good thing. So,
Knock on wood.
right. So, and I can remember a couple of big fires as a kid. One was the tire shop, which was on Osage Street at Osage, across from Big G Tire. There used to be a tire shop there, and that burned, and that was a big fire. We could see it from my house, the flames and stuff like that, and that ended up being arson. But then I remember as a kid, across from Daly's building, there used to be a building there. There was a big fire there. But a lot has changed. I mean, it's just it's amazing. Like I said, I mean, the changes that have happened in the few years that I've been around.